restricting travel into and out of the city for a period of 21 days. Some resorted to ingenious ways, with matatus exchanging passengers near the border, checking points, beating the logic behind restricting movement. KTN's Jeff Kirui tells us more.
A presidential decree barring movement inside and outside the Nairobi metropolitan was put to test less than 24 hours into its implementation. The directive by President Uhuru Kenyatta to ban movement in and out of the affected counties was meant to contain the spread of the coronavirus outside the affected counties. But Kenyans being Kenyans, they've devised new ways of beating that directive. This is the main roadblock along the Nairobi-Nakuru highway. Despite heavy police presence and barricades, motorists and passengers innovated ways to cross border checkpoints. Passengers from either sides are dropped and cross over on foot to the other side. And from there, board matatus waiting on the opposite side and proceed with their journey.
Only a few matatu people who are trying to create panya routes. They are dropping people down there and then they pick them in the bushes down there. But we managed to recover to know the whereabouts where they're dropping people.
Motorists who are locked inside Nairobi Metropolitan sought to penetrate the bushes to evade the roadblocks. This convoy of 7 matatus was seized deep inside the escarpment, making its way out of Nairobi. Their attempt, however, was short-lived. Passengers whom they were ferrying escaped, leaving the drivers in the hands of police on patrol. However, another convoy of 5 matatus and private cars had already managed to exit Nairobi County. The 7 will now spend the night at Lari police cells, awaiting to be arraigned.
We discovered that in the morning. So we took measures, and we have officers on the ground down there, and they are controlling everything.
And with Kenyans devising ways to beat the cessation of movement order, the implementation of the directive becomes a challenge to security officers, jeopardizing efforts to contain the coronavirus from spreading to other counties.
Hakuna kutoka hapa kwa sababu tukianza kutembea huko Ushaguna kwingineko tutapeleka hii virusi huko.
But I want members of the public to understand. We are doing this for all of us. It's good for all of us. We are not doing this to punish our people. We are not doing this to be draconian and so on. But we also have to agree. We have to be firm. Environments that have succeeded to deal with this problem are environments where people have said this is the way to go, and it has been followed.
At various police checkpoints, only vehicles ferrying goods and those from sectors categorized as offering essential services were allowed to pass. Along the Thika Murang'a highway, commuters who were making their way to Thika town were sent back.
Hii serikali hata sijui tulichagua aje. Inatutesa bana. Na sisi ni wakulima wadogo. Watoto wanalia njaa, tunatembea mguu, hakuna kazi, hakuna pesa. Sasa unashindwa ni aje sasa.
Kwa hivyo sasa kuna shida, manake watu wa ngambo hii hawezi wakaenda ngambo ile ingine. Sasa imekuwa kama Kenya na Tanzania.
Interior Cabinet Secretary Fred Matiang'i, who made a stopover at Kamulu, saying the government will relax the cessation on movement rules on a need basis.
We work for the people of Kenya. We will look at case by case and see the merits and demerits of a case as we take decisions, and our officers are going to do that in the various areas.
The ban on movement in and out of Nairobi, effected on Monday, will also extend to Kilifi, Kwale and Mombasa counties, effective 7 p.m. on Wednesday. Jeff Kirui, KTN News.
And that will form part of the fabric of our discussion on today's show. And joining me for that discussion is Vincent Kimosop, who's an economist, as well as Michael Agwanda, a governance expert, who is joining me from the INM studio in the CBD. Welcome to the show, gents. Now, when you look at the sentiments that are coming out of some of the members of the public, some of them are saying serikali inatutesa, but obviously when you listen to the CSs and if you're keeping abreast with what's been happening internationally, this is something that is quite deadly, the virus that is, and it is quite necessary to make such restrictions, and this have been happening in other countries as well, and in some more severe than here in Kenya. So I'll start with you, Mr. Kimosop. What would you say is making people feel that pinch? In terms of a metropolitan like Nairobi, why is it such a lifeline, and why are people feeling it so harshly? And it's just been a day.
I think I would say that we have to look at the numbers, the GDP numbers.
Right.
over 60% of GDP, over 50% of Kenya's GDP is generated in Nairobi, and then when you also add Mombasa, you're looking beyond 60%. So this is really where the pulse of the economy is.
Right.
And you know very well that a big significant number of Kenyans are those that are on what we call hand to mouth. They have to go out, fend for themselves, and then in the evening, that's how they sustain their livelihoods. So, and that's why even the practicalities, you hear that a lockdown might really not work, is because of the realities on the ground.
Okay.
I took a trip around our estate, and I could see, you know, the mothers who clean, you know, the people who have to step out on a day-to-day basis so that they can get business. Now, they are not able to work because we are saying stay at home, protect yourself, and these are people who that is what it means for them to actually have a means in the evening. Now,
right.
If you then move to the supply chain, seeing what is happening on the roads is that it is food that is getting into the city, processed in other industries. That supply chain, that's why people want to get to Nairobi. So you have to appreciate it from an economic perspective. You also need to look at the livelihoods of our people. And that is why we have to appreciate that there is need for a balance in the implementation of the measures that have been advised under the Ministry of Health, so that also we protect these lives. I think just one final thing I'd want to allude is there is also an element that looks like not many people have given this issue the seriousness it deserves.
Yes.
So there is need for more sensitization so that people can actually see that as the CSA say, that we are doing this for the good of you. The element of, and I pointed out in my earlier conversation, we are hearing so much about stay at home, use your mask, sanitize, social distancing.
Yeah.
Now, what is not also clear on the part of the public is that when you stay at home, how will you get food?
Okay.
That for me is where I find as the incomplete narrative coming from our authorities. And I think it will be important moving forward as part of that assurance, because you will hear people are saying, we don't have a problem staying at home. What we are not clear is that when we stay at home, how will we feed our children? How will we take care of our livelihood? So I think if that is buttressed and the communication made complete, then we actually are seeing a possible likelihood of an increased level of compliance and adherence to the guidelines that have been given.
Absolutely, Mr. Kimosop. And then there are those who would argue that in order to be poor, you have to be alive. You understand? So there's it's a push and pull between what's more important, and obviously that now brings in the need for, you know, the government to actually address some of these issues. And when you're bringing us back to the issue of the partial lockdown, Mr. Gwanda, some of these people have complained about the abruptness of the measure that was taken. When you look at how it was announced by 7 p.m. today, we are going to lock down Nairobi, do you think more could have been done to give people some, you know, time? Because in Nairobi, we all know, and all major cities, there is the daytime population, the nighttime population, because there's a lot of movement in and out. So do you think the government could have done a better job in terms of giving people a heads up?
Good morning, Trix. I totally agree that the government ought to have given people a little bit more time to get out of Nairobi or to come into Nairobi. The reason why I say this is because when you look at Nairobi, the statistics are about 5 million people are in Nairobi, and 4 million lives in Nairobi. 1 million goes and comes every single day into the city. That means they're either working in Nairobi or they're doing business in Nairobi, and by evening they need to leave Nairobi and go into their places of residence. I think the abrupt locking of Nairobi put people in a serious quagmire, in the sense that, let's say, for example, somebody who came to TSC office. Remember that this is an office where teachers come from all parts of this country to come to TSC, either for disciplinary matter or for administrative purposes. If they were locked in town within those 3 hours, they were not going to go out of Nairobi. They have no family here. They have no residence here. They have no place that they can humbly say, this is my abode. That means they go to an hotel. They will not be able to afford an hotel cost for the next 21 days. And therefore, when I heard the Minister of Interior, Dr. Matiang'i, saying that this would be on need basis, I thought that is where they needed to have begun with first. Perhaps say, in the next one day, if you are not a resident of Nairobi and you just came here for either treatment or for business to buy something very quickly, like Mr. Ndegwa was saying that he's a plumber and he came here for business and was getting out of this, this town as soon as he could, but he could not get the vehicle to Nyeri, and so he had to spend a night here. Now, they will be allowed to leave town, but the residents, of course, will not be in a rush to get out of this town. I really think that would have been prudent, considering that this is a metropolitan area that also supports, just as Kemosopa said, the GDP of other neighboring counties for that reason. And so I really think they should have thought a little bit better. I mean, the spirit and the letter of lockdown is understood, and it is the right thing to be done. However, doing it in a rush put people in a quagmire. Can you imagine kids and parents going through the bush and literally going through the heaps and the sliding down even as it's raining because they need to get to their home? Right. Really, we cannot allow the security officer to be the one to interpret the order. This order should have been made so clear that even the other Kenyans should be aware that this is the order, so that we don't say on a need basis. That's a little bit ambiguous, and it's going to lead to an extortion experience within those locked boundaries.
Of course, and I dare speculate, given the abruptness of it all, and we do know that Nairobi accounts for the larger number of infections that have emanated and they account for a larger percentage of that number that has been confirmed right now. Do you think this points to a much more serious situation that the government is letting on? Could there be something that we don't know? I'll point this to Mr. Agwanda first, then over to you, Mr. Kimosop.
I strongly believe that the statistics are there. The numbers, if you're looking at the numbers, there are more people in Nairobi being tested every day. Yeah. This does not necessarily mean that in the other towns, we do not have people who might be having this case. It's just that perhaps the testing has not been done to verify this. I'm hopeful that as we go forward to rapid tests, as they're saying, that we could have more numbers in other cities than in Nairobi, but we still do not have those figures yet now. Right. But the reality is this decision was based on the numbers that are in Nairobi, Mombasa, Kilifi, and Kwale. And if you look at those counties, it's as a result of the flights that goes into those countries. We've been Mombasa, Nairobi. Nairobi is the epicenter of transport in Eastern Central Africa, and there were a lot of planes that came in here. Mombasa is a resort area where people go there for vacation. There's a lot of foreigners that were going in there. But again, when we look at this, we know that it is only in Nairobi, and part of Mombasa we've been having a bit of quarantine, but mainly in Nairobi, and it's the statistics of people that have been confirmed positive are actually mainly from the quarantine area. As a result, when some of those people that are released, turn negative, released from the quarantine area, again, there could be possibility that even after they've been released, they can turn positive for that reason. So I think it is correct and it is in order for the lockdown in Nairobi. However, what we are saying is people within the address, where the address is and where they reside is in Nairobi, should be allowed to stay in Nairobi. But if you just came here to visit for one reason or the other, you should be allowed to get to your home so that you can continue with your life, as usual. Again, when we're looking at the testing aspect of it, until it is rolled over, where everybody is able to be tested, we cannot specifically say that Nairobi seems to bear the biggest brand for that reason. Right. I mean, testing for today, even if you were to go for a test for COVID-19, one, it is very expensive on a private endeavor. I went to Lancet to do a test, and it was 13,350. That's way beyond an ordinary person's just testing. And if you go to the government testing places, they will still need a doctor's request for you to be tested. In other words, it's not easy for somebody just to walk in and to be tested. And therefore, when you have people unable to be tested for one reason or the other, and you have it so expensive in private sector, like in Lancet, where it's 13,350 to be tested, and it will take days, literally about 4 to 5 days for you to get that result, then you cannot necessarily say that it is the people around here that seem to be having more, other than the statistics in quarantine area or places where people have been flying in. I strongly believe that still, if somebody was to come here, and I think the president said this in local radio, that if they are coming into Nairobi for medical purposes, they should be allowed. The question is, our police officer, are they trained to be able to understand that this individual is sick, and for that reason he should be allowed to come to Nairobi? They're not trained to do that. The police officers and the security forces deal on orders, do not allow anybody, period. And if you say that they need to go to an extent of verifying whether somebody is sick or not, somebody who's suffering from high blood pressure, for a diabetic, does not necessarily, I mean, how will a cop know that this person could be having a diabetic for that reason? Let us allow him. I'm seeing a situation where if that is not, verified, if that is not made very clear, then we are having a situation where basically corruption is going to get in here, and people who are even sick will be able to be allowed out of this place, and in fact others in other counties, because the order is not clear. It must be clear to the Kenyans. I mean, I saw Ahmed Nazir, a senior lawyer, saying, can somebody translate this thing for us so that we can understand the order, tell it to our clients, and tell it to Kenyans as a whole? I think if Ahmed Nazir is not able to understand this order, then who is, I'm not saying that it should be able to understand the order, but up to his level, if he's not able to understand the order, then maybe a cop is not able to understand this order. And we are shooting ourselves on the foot by saying we are locking down Nairobi. People will use Panya route, and the reasons as to why we are locking down Nairobi is not going to be realized.
Absolutely, and of course we've seen that in the news. They are indeed using those Panya routes, but I think that just points to Nairobi being a sort of lifeline to everyone, in terms of, you've pointed out quite aptly that medical care is quite, a lot of people just depend on KNH as their main source of some specialized sorts of treatment, and therefore there's so many things about Nairobi that when you cut it off, then you really cut off a lot for a lot of people, and that depiction is quite interesting, because how does a cop actually decide what to prioritize? Mr. Kimosop, do you agree with his analysis on why these particular areas have been basically cordoned off, and how this would actually affect how we conduct business as usual?
To some extent, yes. There are things that I think, based on my current engagement in the process, I have more information, and I would help by shedding some light on certain areas to just help us. I've been working closely with the private security sector. If you remember, when the president spoke in the first order that he gave about the issue of curfew, there were 13 listed essential services that were allowed to move even post the curfew times and periods.
Absolutely.
And when the Gazette notice came in from the Ministry of Interior, on number 12 was listed as licensed private security providers, because we pointed out to them that if you are entering a government building, you will find a security guard. If you're entering a hospital, a home, a public building, you will find them. If you don't integrate them into the process, they can actually infect everybody, from the junior person all the way to the senior person. And they actually saw sense, and that is why the Gazette notice was updated. Now, if you look at this process, we need to be careful. I'm an economist, and one of the things that if you look at one of the problems globally in the response, you realize that governments have actually taken a public health or a medical issue and they've given a business and an economic solution. I think we need to be careful to ensure that first, that whereas that COVID-19 is a public health issue, there is need for the experts in the medical and the public health space to provide leadership on how to mitigate it from a medical and also a public health issue. Then now the repercussions or the ramifications which take economic and social dimension come after it. Because if we are very quick to prescribe an economic solution or a political or a social solution to a medical issue, what happens is that we might miss the gaps. I think it is important to appreciate that the health or the medical people in the health sector, WHO, have told us, ladies and gentlemen, Kenyans, that this is a virus that, and they've pointed out the ways that it's spread. We have to then give our attention to those prescriptions that have been given. And then the measures that are coming to mitigate during and after, so that you have an integrated approach. I want to say that courtesy of the information that I've been able to access, actually, you realize that whereas the police, for example, are on the forefront, on the face of the implementation and the execution of the orders, you actually have a situation whereby the planning and the guidelines come from an integrated perspective. So the information I have is that that's why the cabinet secretary was pointing out that there will be the need by the cases where it will be dealt with on a need basis is because they are medical issue. You have somebody who is being transported, for example, from Nakuru or other towns to coming to Nairobi, where you have a better healthcare. Definitely that person will not be locked because of this reality. The problem that we've had, and the reason why the members of the public are skeptical, and I would understand even what my brother is pointing out, is that on day one, if you remember when the order came in, the way the police treated the members of the public in places like Likoni, they took a very analog force approach towards enforcement. Now that actually made people what we call suspicious, and you put people on the offense, fearful. So then the following days, and when other actors came in and we were pointing out, telling the police, hey, excuse me, this is, whereas you are law enforcement, we are in a health and a medical situation, you require the collaboration and the support of the people, because the reality is that if you even look at the ratio of the police vis-a-vis the members of the public, if we were to get to a lockdown situation, they are not able to enforce it on their own. Look at South Africa. Look at other countries. You require the buy-in and the support of the members of the public, and the only way you can get buy-in and support of the members of the public is that if you reach out and communicate to them that this is being done for your good. And that's why I reiterated that members of the public don't have a problem complying with these guidelines. What they are not clear is that if you tell us to stay at home, where are we going to get food? So it is important, therefore, that even when you're distributing, if the next communication will talk about how people will get food, the communications becomes very clear in a way that they are able to actually be part of the process. I'll say this.
Absolutely. I'll have to cut you short right there. Let's take a short break. On the other side, I'm going to throw it over to Mr. Agwanda to tell us what possibly could people do from the safety of their homes to actually keep food on their table, and what can government do to, enable them to achieve this. Let's take a short break. When we come back, we'll have more for you right here on Morning Express.
This is KTN News.
Ikiwa wewe ni mjane, haisababishi wewe mtoto wako ndio aingie kwa gaidi. Haisababishi wewe mtoto wako aingie kwa drugs.
BBI version of evicting people and profiling Kenyans on tribal lines, or are you still on the BBI of uniting Kenyans?
Kuna county inaweza kuwa bila infrastructure. Ukweli au uongo?
Watoto ambao hawajakosea mtu yoyote. Hili ni piko kubwa.
Tuko megonga tukutuku
wakijaribu kuzuia wale, ni kama walikuwa wanazuia wale polisi ili wasiwa
ama viazi vyetu tuende kuviuza mbali sehemu kama Mombasa, kisha hawa waende kununua Mombasa tena warudishe tena kwetu.
Kabla sianze kufly, hizo watoto wakiwa wadogo wanadipute kama tunangamiza hapo tunamaliza.
Mimi ni mtu wa nduthi, yani bodaboda. Napenda na kuheshimu Mungu sana. Kazi yangu naifanya kwa bidii na geteo kubwa sana. Kama kuna mmoja wetu aliwahi kukosea, usisulubishe wote. Hata wewe unajua soko haikosagi kawazimu kamoja. Na hiyo haiwezi kufanya uite kila mtu kwa hiyo soko wazimu. Customer, watu wa nduthi sio wabaya, ni washashe tu wanashoma pisha.
Ili kupata skiza tune yako ya mtu wa nduthi, bonyeza star 811 star 796 hash.
Do not be misinformed by merchants of falsehood. Subscribe to the Standard Digital e-paper and get real and factual first-hand news from the comfort of your home for just 10 shillings daily. Get the Standard Digital e-paper app on Google Play Store and App Store and subscribe now. The Standard Digital e-paper. Tap up just how you like it.
This is KTN News.
Welcome back. We were talking about the possible implications of the lockdown, why people are so feeling the pinch just a few hours after that happened. It's being enforced in Nairobi, Kwale, Kilifi and Mombasa, being that they are the largest contributor to those that have been affected. And of course, they're very strategically located regions in the country and therefore more susceptible to this sort of permeation by the COVID-19 virus or those infected by it. And it's quite necessary in order to protect citizenry, but at the same time there's certain implications and people are feeling it all over the country, which is why a lot of you have been trying to navigate and circumnavigate police bars, cordoned off areas of police barriers in order to get in or out of Nairobi. And we're talking to Vincent Kimosop, who's an economist, as well as Michael Agwanda, who's a governance expert, coming to us live from our I&M City Centre studio, just to tell us what they feel should be done to enable people to be more at ease with these restrictions that are being put in place, and at the same time, keep up with their, normal activities that ensure that they have food on the table. And we're on that point, Mr. Kimosop had told us that the bigger question would be, while we are adhering to the restrictions, what can we do to stay alive? Mr. Agwanda, as a governance expert, what do you think the government can do to ensure that people are cushioned more economically?
First of all, let me say this. You are advising every citizen of this country, and that's what World Health Organization has said, that we need to have a face mask.
Yes.
The question is, why wouldn't we have enough face mask in this country?
Mm-hmm.
If you go to a pharmacy today, a face mask is about 100 shillings. That is more than what a person in Kibera who lives from hand to mouth will be able to have. Basically, if they had 50 shillings, that would be their lunch or their dinner.
Sure.
You want this individual to use the face mask. And by the way, the face masks are supposed to be used maybe once a day. I mean, just one in a day, and then the following day you get another one. First thing that the government needs to do is to avail as many face masks as they can in this country. I believe part of the money that came from the donors and part of the money that is being given by the private sector, part of the money that has now come from EACC, from corrupt individuals, the 2 billion that was out there, buy as many face masks so that it can be available to the people at an affordable price. Otherwise, the idea and the encouragement of telling people that they use face masks is not going to be achieved. And one, it's because of the droppings. When you have the droppings, that could easily, and you're infected, it could easily affect somebody else. People are devising ways of putting lassos and all manner of clothes. Those ones do not stop the dropping. And so the government, in terms of governance, the government should be able to provide this thing to the country so that they're available. When we talk about issues of PPE, and Dr. Mercy Korir asked a very fundamental question on some of these supplies. The government should avail these things, not only in government hospitals, but also in private hospitals, because there are many Kenyans who are going to these private hospitals. The idea behind the whole thing is how do we stop this thing from spreading? It's not a time to discriminate that it can only be found in KNH or other places, but it should be in all the hospitals so that they are available. When it comes to mass testing, I know that the reagents might not be enough, but this is where we need to drive in terms of governance. We need to have all the testing done and available to everybody else. People like Lancet should be brought on board so that they don't charge people exorbitantly to stop people from going for testing, but to allow people to at least go there and have the testing done. Another thing that must be done is when we have a situation where basically few people are able to go to work. We are talking about the SMEs who are not able to actually go to work. I think, and when you look at what the banks have been posting in the recent years, they've been posting exorbitant profit to 13 billion, 9 billion, 10 billion. Now is a time where the government need to rein on these banks and say, look, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, how about if we release at least 60 billion just out there so that people can get this at a very, very minimal interest rate so that they can at least start some business, and then we ensure that we also get a VAT out of this, or pay as you earn out of this. The government will be getting revenue, but they will have released a lot of money into the economy. If they do not release this money into the economy, I will tell you, as Kemosom will tell you, that an economist, the economy is going to crash. And if the economy crashes, then you want people to stay at home. It will just be a matter of time before they get out, to get anybody who is driving out there, to run into the supermarkets, and it will be chaotic. So we have to. But last and not least, when you tell us to get and stay in our homes, and we know very well, if you look at the Standard newspaper today, it's talking about the reserves in our grain that is depleted. We have no maize in our grains. The Rift Valley people are saying, oh, we have some maize, but nobody knows how much maize is there. I think it is high time, as Dr. Wekesa is saying, we have to get the maize into this country so that just in case of a lockdown, there will be some food that people can have. If we don't have food, I am telling you, by locking down this country, you are creating yourself in a serious mess that you will never, never want to be in. So within these 21 days that we are into partial lockdown in Nairobi, Kilifi, Kwale, and Mombasa, please let's ensure that there's enough food so that, as Mutahi Kagwe, Minister of Health, is saying, that within the 21 days, if we don't see good results, and there could be a possible lockdown in the whole country, you cannot lock down if you don't have food. Provide and avail those food. Wekesa is saying that he has about 10 billion that they can use to buy maize. Why can't they start saying that anybody in this country, in Rift Valley, whether they're the people who've been hoarding maize or not, why don't you bring that maize, we buy it, and then we see how much maize we don't have, and make sure that we import this maize in time before this country goes into problem. Absolutely. Otherwise, what we are seeing in the villages is a 2 tin of Goro is already selling at about 140, 150. Now, as time goes by, it's going to be worse. And the question is, how are you going to feed this country if you've not availed the grains that are required? And you're saying, some of them are saying that, grain millers are holding some of these, maize in their stores.
Yes.
The government has power to go and inspect all these grain millers, in their stores, how much they have if they want to cash on this and use this as an opportunity to make exorbitant profit. This is not the time to make exorbitant profit.
Yeah.
I conclude by saying this. It is also the time for our billionaires and multi-billionaires that have been posting lots of billions in this country to start donating. We are seeing this trend. Let's not just wait for Jack Ma and other rich people in the other part of the world to help Kenya. We have so many millionaires. And in fact, some of that millions, those millions that they have, was stolen from government. It is the right time now to return this money to the people so that we can help, this country move forward. I mean, I've seen some few politicians giving out, containers and giving out food. We are yet to see the multi-billionaires that have made billions in this country, some of them rightfully and some of them through theft, to give back to the society and help the people that are already suffering, that have lost jobs and are not able to go to their kiosks because they're being told you got to stay at home.
Right, Mr. Kimosop, this is not something that is new to us. As he talks about billionaires giving to the society and ensuring that people are even donating masks or respirators and what have you, or even just cash to small business owners. Sarah Blakely of Spanx actually gave a donation of $5 million, I think, to small business owners to cushion them right now. What is this a reality that we could also adopt instead of just waiting, as he has said, for the likes of Jack Ma? And also, do you agree with Mr. Agwanda's possible solutions to some of the problems that we are facing in terms of releasing cash into the economy to ensure that we actually survive this?
I think we have some examples we can borrow from. And I would want to answer as in response to some of the issues is highlighted.
Yes.
Because our main problem as a country has never been even policy. Our problem has always been execution and the discipline to follow through. If you look at the fiscal measures that the president recommended, together with the policies that central bank recommended, you realize that on both ends you have an expansionary fiscal policy and also an expansionary monetary policy, and really that will result in liquidity in the market.
Now, but then some would argue that these are measures that would only, favor,
Yeah, I'm going to get to that.
Yeah.
I think for me, what I would want to say is that let us remember that we are in a health situation.
Right.
So let's not lose our focus. And what other countries like South Korea succeeded, they've succeeded by, the first thing that they do is that they test, and they massively test so that they can get the results. And then they track and trace, and then they treat those they've identified. Why I'm pointing out is that if I'm an economist, if you give me a problem, there is high likelihood I'll give you an economic solution to the issue. Why I'm reminding us the factory settings that it is a public health or a medical situation. Let us get our act together on that space. And then number two is that then now
I'd like to pause you on that one, actually. So it's been rightly pointed out earlier on by Mr. Agwanda that it takes at least 13,000 plus for a test right now, right?
Yes.
And of course, the treatment, I'm told, wouldn't be, or voluntary testing wouldn't be free of charge. So how would a government that is already in the hole, such as ours, handle testing on that mass level? Would this be free? How would we approach this matter? Because as it were, it seems like we're already struggling with the very basics such as food.
And that's why, thanks for that. And that's why I'm pointing out that our interventions from the other spaces should actually speak to expand the fast solutions on the medical. Like if, for example, the monies that we are releasing, it should be towards WHO commended Cambridge because of the kits they came in.
Yeah.
So the ability to expand such a program so that you increase the testing, ensure that the medical facilities have the the personal protection equipment, ensure that the masks are freely available. I actually went to a chemist last evening to check, and I was told one mask was 150 shillings, and you can see clearly not many people can afford. So I'm pointing out that let us first get our act together on getting the medical interventions affordable and accessible to the masses. Then, because I'm careful not to be able to look at businesses continuity and business succeeding before we first we need to have the people, and we need to have lives and a country first. So whatever it takes to protect and preserve life, that for me would be the most important thing. Then the second thing is now the interventions we are making on how do we ensure that businesses and the economy continue moving ahead. Now, if we have that staggered approach, what is pointing out on ensuring there is enough liquidity, access to credit, and also facilitating the participation of all spaces. I know there was the COVID fund that was established.
Absolutely.
But until now, it's not very clear. What you actually see is that it's not very clear how that framework will be established so that the 10 shillings that a poor person can contribute is as important as a billion that the other people will participate. So this is not the time where you have competition on the corporate table on who is doing better than who. This is where all support and all interventions from all parts of the country are required. The other thing I will also be hesitant is that I know we will.
But wouldn't it? Sorry to interrupt. Isn't this the time for all of them to come up and contribute all those billions and millions of shillings?
I agree with you, and that's what I was pointing out in my is that the element of the sequencing in the intervention.
Yeah.
Because if we don't want to put the cart before the horse. What we want to do is that sort out the medical and the public health interventions.
Yes.
Then move to the social and the economic intervention. Now, all these require political goodwill. If you actually look at this situation, you realize that countries that the political leadership saw and intervened on time, you actually see that they were able to ensure that the curve, they were able to ensure that their curves normalized ahead of time. Look at even New York. If you look at the governor who has been updating people, he is not. I'm not known if he's a medical person, but you can see very clearly the consistency, the messaging of hope. This is where we are at. This is the needs that we require. This is the kind of support that we need. That has its place in directing the need to where it matters most.
Right.
I will finish by pointing out that the following, that I believe we will get through this process.
Yes.
So there is need for us to not only think in the short term, in the medium term, but also in the long term. Why am I saying this? A lot of business models are going to change as a result of this process.
Absolutely.
Look at, I saw when you were doing the briefing earlier when we started the program, the current discussions around the examinations. People are saying, will examinations still happen on time? There are questions around the issue of how do we do business. You are realizing that this is going to change even our rethinking about security, that actually security is not a brick and mortar issue. It is not the control and containment of people, but actually what human security means. That when you are locked down in that house, will you have food? Will you have water? Will you have medical? That is what security is. So even our national security architecture has to change to align with the reality. So this COVID thing, in my view, to our planners, our national, those who are in decision making, have to take a step back to actually ask themselves the hard questions. Have we invested so much in sectors that don't really matter more than what is important? Because currently you're seeing our healthcare, which is so critical this time, is actually an export sector, unlike other sectors. So it will be reprogrammed. We will reprogram and we will have to reprioritize as a people.
Absolutely, and obviously, while we have locked down partially our city, then we have also locked down our borders. What will be the fallout from that, and how can we actually cushion ourselves looking forward? I'll start with Mr. Gwanda as we come back to you, Mr. Kimosop.
Trix, before I answer that, I wanted to follow up on something that Vincent has just said in regards to the update that is happening in New York, and we are doing very, very well in the country here in terms of the update. Every day, I look forward to an update, a COVID-19 update, which is a beautiful opportunity to hear what is happening. But again, corruption thrives in confusion. We are in our health confusion. When Dr. Mercy Correa asked about specific questions in regards to the PPEs and the supplies that are there, what the minister told us is there were already 10,000 that were in the country, and the masks were being secured, and many other answers that we were told. I don't think it is a time for us to be told what has been brought and how many we are procuring. I think if we are doing all this briefing every single day, we need to see these things. We need to see if, for example, like what I was saying, that there will be about 200,000 PPEs that will be in this country in another 2 weeks or so. Then we need to see those ones, and we need to know, in terms of governance, how many are going to, for example, Coast, how many are going to Nairobi, how many, so that people are aware that X number of PPs have gone to, for example, Kisumu or Eldoret for that reason. People are aware that X number of gloves have gone to these places. In that way, the government and the public knows that these things are available, and we've seen them being flagged off to various places. I have one of my friends who's a health worker and was telling me that they were actually given a box of masks to share, for people, and these are people that are dealing with one-on-one, that are dealing with people that perhaps some of them are infected. How do you just have a box to be shared by 4 health workers for that reason? We need, this thing should not be put under. As they give the briefing, they also need to give the briefing in regards to materials that are there and have been secured and how much it has costed the country, because that is when people will give freely. That accountability is very, very important, that these X materials have costed us this X amount of money, and you can see that your money and the government money is being used wisely for the purposes that it is intended for. And if that is not very clear, then people will just start talking and blaming the government even where they're not supposed to blame the government. Let them quantify what is available, and let them also tell us where these are available. As we are looking at the lockdown, I also had the minister saying that they are advising against inter-county traveling. Other than the few that have already been locked out, they are also advising that we need to limit this inter-county travels here and there. I think that is just to prepare us for the lockdown. Perhaps if things get worse in the next 20 days or so. What I am saying is the county COVID management team is so poor in the whole country, other than what we are seeing in Mombasa and Nairobi. We need to look at the county management of COVID, because we have some counties, for example, that nobody knows whether they have ICU beds or not. Nobody knows whether they have ventilators or not. Yes, we might be giving briefings in Nairobi and saying, oh, Homa Bay County is doing very well. But how many beds are in Homa Bay County that will be able to handle a COVID-19 case? I mean, we already seen one case now in Kisii, and Homa Bay and the neighboring counties, if we're not careful, they will get it very easily, because those inter-county traveling are still taking place. We need to have an audit, not just an audit of the management, but the audit of equipment in all these counties, not through the press briefing that we are having, but we need to physically go into these places and say, this is what we have. And if possible, the media need to get into those, every single county, because if we don't do this, we'll be time-barred. We will only react when we already have a case. We are having poor management and leadership in many counties in this country. And as a result, we are setting ourselves to even a dangerous path if we've not gone out there. I mean, somebody might say, yes, they're making preparations, but how sure are we? Why are we not being, why is this not being open to the public so that we can see the ICU bed, the ventilators are there, the trained health workers are already there, the PPE equipments are already there that these people can use in case of an event. Remember that in this case, we are also having a situation where basically if one health worker is infected, there will be about 7 of them that will be infected in this area. And Mercy Correa asked the question of who these health workers who are treating specifically the ones that are COVID-19 positive, confirmed positive, how when they go back to their homes, what happens? They're most likely going to infect their families. And hence, we got the result, I mean, the answer saying that, you know, they're trying to set a place where once these health workers have you know, been in contact with the people who are infected, they can go into a place and not necessarily their home. These informations will not have come if the government was not interrogated. I strongly believe that as much as we're talking about medical issues and we're having medicals, you know, expert coming in to tell us what we need to do, we also need to interrogate the government further so that some of this information that they do not want to tell us until they are asked is brought into public in the interest of the public. And I agree with Vincent Kimoso.
Mr. Gwanda, I'd have to cut you short.
Public, unless the citizens.
Mr. Gwanda, I'd like to wind up because we've run out of time. Thank you so much for your passion. But then as we wind up, what are some of the lessons that we can learn from other nations that have locked down? I'll start with you, Mr. Kimosop, your closing remarks, because this is not something that is specific to Kenya. It's something that's happening all over the globe.
I think my brother comes from Mombasa Bay County. Anyway, that is on a lighter note. One major lesson that we learn through process is the power and the place of leadership.
Okay.
You actually realize when countries that intervened on time, looking at the case of Japan, the case of South Korea, is that political leadership can make a significant impact in transforming a status or a public emergency or crisis. And that, for me, is the first lesson. Number 2 is that the whole element of priorities in terms of resource allocation and investment that countries have put. We have prepared for wars, invested massively in military, in other sectors that actually when a problem like this comes in, that an enemy that is invisible, you realize that sectors, like the health sectors that are so critical, are actually left and exposed and vulnerable. So the whole element of really reprioritizing and putting our act together. The third lesson that has also come out clearly through this process is the element, this is now the context specific, that it is important to allow and to give opportunities to every sector when an emergency comes in. We are in a public health challenge that has taken an economic and a social dimension. You realize that a medical intervention is required, an economic solution, a social solution. So giving an integrated approach to problems is one thing that has come out into this situation. Then the fourth thing that has come out is that our economic models that have been built over time based on histories in the Industrial Revolution and also histories in the recent technology and shifts in the economy. This is going to reconfigure economies and business models. And it is important that out of these countries emerge strong and better. I am buttressing the fourth point because Second World War was the second biggest emergency that the countries in the world faced. And out of it, we had the UN, out of it, we had the IMF, out the World Bank, and all these institutions that promoted multilateral approach to issues.
Right.
Now, this is a more bigger challenge that we are currently facing. And out of this, there will be other models in how governments and how authorities will actually approach and move out of this. I think I'm saying this for the purposes of that it is important that we relook at COVID and look at interventions that will take us longer than those that took us from the Second World War. So I think for me, those are my 4 takeaways out of this situation.
We've run out of time. That has been Victor Kimosopa, an economist, as well as Michael Agwanda, a governance expert. Thank you very much, gents, for being a part of this conversation, and hopefully we'll be able to actually take those lessons from this experience, both in